Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Hey, welcome back to the Cultivate podcast. I'm Ty Fischer, the head of school here at Veritas Academy. And last season, we had Robbie George on talking about helping children be courageous in the midst of cancel culture. So I thought, who do I know who's read a lot about controversy? So I thought of my friend Doug Wilson, who I did the omnibus curriculum with he and Gene Veith. So Doug, your only familiarity with controversy is reading about it, right?
Yes, I read about it in history books.
That's good. That's good. So we're dealing with an expert here. And Doug is the pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. He's written more books than I can read and has been a board member, one of the founding board members of the Association of Classical and Christian Schools, and has been a long time, not just one of the guys that I listen to on my podcast headset, but one of the guys who's been really a blessing to me and has been someone that I've walked through some controversies with. And I've always been impressed that Doug gives good counsel during that time and that he doesn't lose his sense of humor and is able to speak truth. So how did you get so good at finding controversy, Doug?
I think the question should be posed to controversy, which is figured out how to get to me, how to find me.
So is it a correlation or a causality or what is this thing?
Well, I don't know. I would say for the first half of my life, I wouldn't say that I was really engaged in controversies. I was engaged in many discussions and debates and witnessing opportunities and that sort of thing. But it was usually one-on-one or one with a group of people. And it was always generally pretty affable because it was personal and right there. When I was in the Navy, I had a lot of conversations with guys, sometimes in groups, but it was sort of a group debate or discussion, vigorous discussion, but not anything with the knives out. And I found myself in that position because I grew up in a family where debating various topics was sort of treated as an indoor sport, where at the dinner table, people would say something and someone else would debate, challenge it, and there'd be vigorous back and forth at the dinner table. And generally, everybody, I don't remember anybody ever losing their cool. It was just our family was like that.
Yeah.
And it took me some time to figure out other people's families weren't like that. So for us, a debate did not mean a quarrel.
Yeah.
And then you get out into the world and you discover for some people, they don't know how to disagree without it becoming personal and hurt feelings and that sort of thing.
Well, and maybe even more now than it was then.
Oh yeah. Far worse now.
Yeah. You weren't part of my family, were you?
No.
Is Wilson a Scots-Irish name?
It is.
There you go. That's it, Doug.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, years ago, I read a book called Born Fighting by James Webb, which is a treatment of the Scots and the Scots-Irish. And after I read that book, I thought, okay, well, that explains a lot.
Yes. Right, well, Hillbilly Elegy does the same thing for me and my family.
Yeah. So after I became a pastor and our church started to grow, and we started having an impact in our town that was beyond the boundaries of the conversation, that's when things started to get with controversy, because at that point we were betting with real money. So as Logos School began to grow here in Moscow, the growth of private classical education in Moscow has been a real challenge to the public school system.
Yeah.
And it's a monetary challenge, and people's livelihoods depend on it. And all of a sudden, they take a keen interest in coming after you. So, and the other side doesn't really fight fair. So they'll find there's a scandal. Let's say somebody in our congregation gets into sin, and we deal with it, but it's good ammo for them. So and then this was the same time where the online world was coming online, basically. Yeah. So the second half of my life, which has been marked by numerous controversies, has almost all been in the online internet age.
Yeah.
I wasn't really in broad fights to speak of prior to the internet. It was almost all personal sorts of things.
Because somebody would have to drive out to Moscow, Idaho to argue with you before the internet, right? Or call you on the phone or something like that.
And what I do now is, let's say I'm looking at my Twitter feed and someone says something outrageous. Wilson kicks puppies during his lunch hours. That's his entertainment. What I do is I click on their profile, and if they've got 3 followers, mom and 2 sisters, I just let it sail by. I just ignore it, because if I were to respond to that kind of thing, I've just given him a microphone.
Sure.
I've given him a microphone. I've made his day. It's what he was hoping for, and so on. Well, let's say the same exact comment is made by someone else, and I click on the profile, and they have 9,300 followers. Then I answer it. I'll engage in that controversy because they just gave me a microphone.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so it basically boils down to how strategic is this?
Yeah. So basically, is that one of the criteria you are using to think about when are you going to engage and when are you going to avoid engagement? And how do you, so that's maybe one of the principles we should be training our young people in, is to think strategically?
Yes, absolutely. Is the game worth the candle? Is this worthwhile? It reminds me of that cartoon of, "Are you coming to bed, dear?" And he says, "No, somebody is wrong on the internet."
You're never going to get to bed.
You're never going to get. Somebody's always wrong, and so you have to ask yourself: what's the outcome I want from this? What's the upside? Is there? Can I engage in this and run a profit on it?
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when, if it's just 2 or 3 people, a handful of people, you just don't want to deal with the slander. You don't want to dignify the slander. If it's someone already has a microphone, then you answer and you engage. But even there's a limit. Let's say the person is just totally irrational and just doesn't listen to a word you're saying. At some point, you just decide you're going to save your breath for cooling your porridge and check out.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about how your family life growing up was part of the thing that prepared you for being faithful and strong and not minding debate and discussion, and sometimes even sharp debate and discussion. So how we live, Veritas Academies in Lancaster County, and there are a lot of Christians here, and some of them very, very bright and wise and entrepreneurial Christians who, are more, they're looking to avoid controversy or avoid fighting at all costs. Pacifist tradition's big here. How can we help to train kids in this culture and in maybe just take more broadly in American culture to be ready for controversy when in our culture, basically everybody's just shouting at everybody? Yeah.
The problem with the shouting is not the volume. The problem with the shouting is that you're shouting at the moon. Mm-hmm. It's like old man on the front lawn yelling at the clouds. You just don't want to be in worthless pursuits. So my dad, you mentioned sort of the pacifist context or the non-combative context that is characteristic not only of the Mennonite and the Amish tradition, but a lot of evangelicals really shy away from any kind of direct confrontation. My dad was a graduate of the Naval Academy and a veteran of the Korean War. He wrote a book in the 1960s called Principles of War, applying the principles of military warfare to spiritual warfare to evangelism and so on. And I grew up in Annapolis in a military context. My dad thought like a military man. And if you read through the New Testament, look at all the military metaphors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And actually, when you think about it, it's not really a metaphor. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. We are in a conflict, like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to, I think it's Trotsky said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And that's something that I think a lot of evangelicals are starting to come to grips with over the last 2 years. The controversy is coming for them. The
Yes.
war is coming for them. The throwdown moment is coming for them. And you just absolutely need to prepare your kids for it.
Right. Like it's that same thing about logic, that we can fail to train our kids in logic and then just put them at the mercy of people that know and understand it. If you're a Christian and you think the culture's going to find a way to make nice with you, the evidence is scant at this point.
Right.
Talk about now. So that was your childhood, and I know your father from listening to you talk about him. He really, when in thinking about how to serve Christ's kingdom, he really thought strategically. So I mean, and that kind of led to like where you are, where Christ Church is, where New St. Andrews College is. Tell everybody about that a little bit.
Yeah, just a quick. Let me give you a quick note about his personality, and then answer that question. A few years ago, he's with the Lord now, but a few years ago at Sabbath dinner, he made a comment. My dad made a comment in passing, something like, "No sense dying with a good reputation," and one of my daughters said, "Do you have a good reputation, Grandpa?" And his answer was, "Better than it ought to be." So he was always interested in confronting and dealing with things that needed to be confronted. He wasn't a nitpicker. He didn't confront everybody about everything. But if it needed to be confronted, he would do it. But he didn't just collide with things. He thought strategically. So in military, this goes back to his thinking as a military strategist. He in military affairs, there's a thing called the decisive point.
Mm-hmm.
In a battle or in a war, a decisive point is a point in the battle that is simultaneously strategic and feasible. Because it's feasible, it's possible for you to take it. It's possible for you to accomplish it. Because it's strategic, it matters when you do. It matters to the outcome of the battle if you do. So in evangelistic terms or in cultural war terms, New York City is strategic, but not feasible.
Right.
Okay. Elk River, Idaho is feasible, but not strategic. So we could take Elk River in a couple of weeks.
Just move a few families in.
Just unload the moving van, and then there we'd be. But all we'd have is Elk River. It's not strategic. So my dad decided that in North America, the decisive points were major universities in small towns. And then he discovered that Moscow, Idaho, and Pullman, Washington were two small towns, 8 miles apart, with a major university in each one.
Yeah, Washington State and University of Idaho, right?
Correct. So he moved here. There's two universities 8 miles apart, two small towns 8 miles apart. And he did that because the small town made it feasible. The university made it important. And that's why this suite of ministries is here now, is because my dad back in the 1970s was a strategic thinker.
Mm-hmm. So when we think about young people coming out of classical Christian schools, I think that they are different than young people coming out of our culture sometimes, our other cultural schools and institutions. But when we see young people being conformist and cowardice would be the word that comes to mind, and the word that Robert George used last season. What's driving cowardice in our culture, both in the young person area and then I see it all throughout our society in corporations and pastors even.
I would say a close cousin to this cowardice. Sometimes it's just overt cowardice.
Mm-hmm.
Other times it's timidity or insecurity, okay, where they don't want to engage because they're not confident of what they are engaging on behalf of. And this is why I think a rigorous classical Christian education is such a blessing, because Chesterton once says that you don't fight because you hate what's in front of you. You fight because you love what's behind you.
Yep.
And inculcating, basically, love is a fighting emotion. And C.S. Lewis once said that anger is what love bleeds when you cut it.
Mm.
When what you love is attacked, then you're going to get from normal human beings a posture that's willing to resist, willing to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the reason we don't fight the way we ought is because we don't love the way we ought.
So when love grows cold, then cowardice reigns.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's really good. So it talked about in being prepared for controversies that come looking for you. How important is worship and Christian community in readiness to face those controversies wisely?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I would say that worship it's not like worship is the practicing for controversy and then you're equipped to deal with controversy. I would say that worship is the central controversy.
Mm.
Worship is where the central battle is waged. So one of the things we've taught our congregation and we have taught our kids growing up is that worship is warfare. And we are ascending into the heavenly places. We are praising and worshiping God. It's the pattern of the book of Revelation. So if you look, there's two layers all the way through the book of Revelation. There's the worship of God in the heavenlies and the commotion on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we've taught our people that as we worship God, we are asking God that his name be glorified on earth as it is in heaven. So, as echoing the words of the Lord's Prayer. So we glorify Christ's name in the heavenly places in worship, asking him to do on earth what has just been done in heaven by us. So it's sort of a reciprocity. The more faithfully we worship God and we engage in that worship as sort of an agonistic, disciplined, focused thing, the more we expect things to come to start shaking loose on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's precisely what we've seen in our small town here. I've many times I've told the saints that when we gather and worship, God gives us the privilege of gathering before the gates of Hades every week, picking up a battering ram and swinging the battering ram at the gates of Hades. And that's what our worship is.
Mm.
And we get the privilege of taking another swing with it every 7 days. And initially, they don't take any notice of it. But then they begin to hear this distant boom. What's that? What's that noise? Boom. What's that noise? And then they start putting two and two together and come after you.
Yeah.
And so the Tuesday afternoon controversy, if someone writes a newspaper column against your church or there's a news story, front page story, there was one week where I think Christ Church was on the front page of the newspaper every night of the week. When that kind of flurry is happening, we always want to see it as a downstream consequence. It's a lesser controversy that is born of the fact that we engaged with the enemy, the adversary, in our worship on the Lord's Day.
Mm. Boy, that's a great vision. But then it would behoove us to be in the right kind of worship, right?
Right. You can't do this and have a worship service that sounds like a junior high pep rally.
So it's amazing that you get involved in controversy so much, Doug.
Astonishing.
Just astonishing. So I was in worship. I was also thinking of just the comfort and the stability and in the sacraments, the identity that we see in our connection to Christ. Is that when you're involved in controversy, is that a place of rest and renewal for you in worship, or is that something you think about a lot?
It is.
When you're a pastor, I mean, that's like the only hour you work each week, right?
Right. That's all I do. And the other thing I would do is play golf if I played golf. But,
No, I
don't.
I've actually played golf with you, and we both proved that we are not golfers.
Yeah. So basically, it's one of those. It's a weird sort of thing because having just described the worship service as the most martial moment of the church's life during the week, at the same time, the Bible describes it as rest. Mm-hmm. We worship on the Lord's Day, which is the Christian Sabbath, which is our day of rest. And there is something truly strengthening and nourishing and refreshing about worshiping the Lord. Mm-hmm. So you go into the worship service prepared to sort of leave it all on the court, if you will, and then you come away strengthened.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, this next question is one which is probably theoretical for you because I don't know if you've ever been on the wrong side of a controversy, but
yeah, of course, but let's not talk about those.
I'm sure there are other podcasts for that. So how can we help our children have a sense of what to do when they find themselves on the wrong side of a controversy, or they God helps them to see, maybe through his word, maybe just by interacting with people, whoops, I'm rowing the wrong direction.
Right.
How have you handled that? Because I mean, you've been in enough debates and disagreements, and I know what's one of the things that I've respected about you is that there've been times when you've kind of printed retractions I did notice that Augustine had like 4 volumes of retractions at the end of his collected works. Like, not wrong there. Not wrong there.
Yeah. So I would break that question in 2. There is the realization that you're on the wrong side of a controversy, and where you're the protagonist. You're the one conducting it, and you're the one who's wrong. And then the other side of this would be where it's your side that's wrong, but you haven't bought into it.
Right.
But where you realize that, hey, all my favorite people online are saying this thing and it's wrong. Okay, I don't agree with it. And all the people attacking them are the bad guys for being wrong. That's a second thing. So if you're the protagonist, if you're the person who's been in error, as soon as you realize it, and if it's been public, I think you need to just sort of own it and acknowledge it straight up the middle.
Yep.
So, and that's why I have a tag on my blog that's labeled retractions, actually modeling that after Augustine. But there have been places where I've been wrong about some factual thing, other places where I've been doctrinally wrong. So I was an Arminian and became a Calvinist. I was Credo-Baptist and became a Paedo-Baptist. I was sort of a historic pre-mill guy, became an agnostic on it, and then became post-mill. So there have been a number of places where I've reversed course, and I think that you have to say, yes, this is, I became a Calvinist in 1988. If you come across any tapes from 85 on me talking about Calvinism, pay no attention. But, I think you just have to own it and say, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. Then there are other times where it's a factual error. You told your history class that Tamerlane was a Swede or, something. And that you have to go back and fix it. You just have to, and you should try to fix it in a way that's as public as the error was.
Yep.
When it's someone on your side behaving badly, I think that you have to approach it more delicately than you perhaps would if it was the bad guy on the other side. But you do need to do it, because in these inflamed culture war days of ours, there are some Christians who have sort of recently been red pilled, and they don't want to punch right at all. And as I recently wrote, that means if you say I'm not going to punch right, that means the devil has a free pass to attack you from the right. And there's some bad stuff over there. You don't want to give any sort of credence to white supremacy or to kinism or things like that, even though they are upsetting to the feminists.
Right.
Our goal should be to stand for the truth.
Yeah.
Not for a particular faction or party.
Yeah. The enemy of my enemy might well be my enemy.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah. So you've been involved in some pretty interesting debates, both with other believers and with atheists, intellectuals like Christopher Hitchens. How are those different? And one harder than the other? I mean, it probably takes a lot. I would think it takes a lot of courage. Christopher Hitchens was a bright fellow. He was eloquent. So it takes courage to go into that kind of thing. But it's probably a different kind of thing when you're dealing with fellow believers, right?
Yeah. So here, let me divide. Some of this divides along debating with a fellow believer versus an unbeliever, but it's actually, I need to divide it a little differently. There are collisions that you're in where the point of controversy is whether or not I'm a skunk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then with Hitchens, it wasn't that at all. It was whether or not God exists. So it was possible for me to enjoy a meal with Christopher Hitchens. We got along really well behind the scenes. We got along famously and didn't have any kind of personal friction at all. He only ever insulted me on stage.
So he only insulted you publicly. You were great privately.
That's right. That was part of it, but that was part of his shtick. That was part of how he debated. He was very good that way. But I understood what he was doing, and no blood, no foul, and so we got along great privately. But he was hostile toward the central doctrines of Christianity, centrally the fatherhood of God and the vicarious substitutionary death of Christ on the cross. He was hostile toward those, but affable toward me. Right? He didn't think that I was a skunk. Mm-hmm. But there are other people who come after me their thesis is that I'm doing dirty deeds, that I, enable pedophiles, and that I am trying to bring slavery back, and that I'm trying to do a bunch of stuff I'm not trying to do.
For the record here, Doug, you're not trying to do any of those things, right?
Yeah, correct. just for the record. So when they come after me, the position they're arguing for makes personal friendship very challenging.
Yeah.
Right? Now, sometimes it can work because someone may have come to those conclusions about me because of stuff they've read about me or things they've read online. And then they meet me and they find themselves getting along with me. And that creates all sorts of cognitive dissonance in them. Mm-hmm. Like, what's going on? Yeah, what's happening? So just yesterday, I had a lunch appointment with someone, a non-believer, who had clashed with me, written a column against me, and I responded in the newspaper. And he quite graciously said, "Hey, we should get together. I want to meet you face to face." And we got along well. And it's going to be harder for him the next go round to do what he did the first time.
Yeah.
So now this is the odd thing. I generally have the controversies with fellow believers. More of those fall in the category of them believing that I'm a bad actor. And when I'm debating with unbelievers, not so much.
Well, and you have there's this other dynamic that I've seen sometimes where someone will text me breathlessly and say, "Oh, have you seen that Doug's at it again?" And they send me a link, and I click on the link, and it's to a 2007 story or something like that. And I'm like, well, actually, Doug's not at it again. Like, it's like, this is just recycle. Like, you've got
Right.
Christians out there treating you sometimes in a way that they would never treat unbelievers. Is that frustrating, or how do you, when that's happened, and I've been around you, you seem to keep good humor. So what's the key to having a thick enough skin to take that kind of punch?
Yeah, you could be either have thick skin or be mentally unbalanced.
do you choose between? Do you vacillate between the two, or do you go half and half, or what is it?
No. Well, actually, this goes back to where I want to take my hat off to my father again, and that is, well, let me change the metaphor. A good quarterback is someone who can read the field. You know, he falls back with the ball ready to pass, and he can see the whole field at once.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just being focused on one thing at a time. A quarterback reads the field. A good general or a good admiral will read the field. He'll just see where everybody is and what's actually going on, what this actually means. So let's say I'm minding my own business, and all of a sudden I see that something from 2007 blew up again. All the anti-aircraft fire around my airplane tells me that I must be over the target. Okay.
Describe what you mean there. That lost me a little bit. You're over the target. So what do you mean?
If I'm flying a bomber, and my mission is to bomb some industrial factory, when I fly for 2 hours, and then all of a sudden anti-aircraft fire starts blowing up all around my plane,
mm-hmm.
That tells me that it's about ready. I'm over the target. I'm now a threat.
Yeah, somebody's doing something to guard that thing that you're over.
Correct. So I've noticed, and there's a very clear correlation here. I've noticed, believe it or not, there are times when we get very positive press or not stink press, or something big happens that is a blessing that we regard as a blessing, as a good thing, And when that happens, one time the New York Times did a profile piece on us, for example, and it wasn't a hatchet job. When we get good press or relatively decent press at a high level, oftentimes all the critics come out to play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they start throwing whatever they've got, which might be the 2007 story.
Yeah.
So that tells me that we must be over the target.
Okay.
We must be getting close to something that they want to guard us. They want to keep us away from.
Well, when you're in the midst of a controversy like this, like you said, you could have a meal with Christopher Hitchens after debating him on stage. Sometimes with your Christian brothers, that meal would look more like people throwing food at you or something like that. But
right.
What do you do to try to maintain good relationships when you're involved in a controversy?
One of the things we have done is, and we've done this multiple times, especially with fellow Christians, when somebody launches an attack, Wilson is this or Wilson is that. One of the things we've done is we've invited them to come out to Moscow to take a look around. We will pay their fare. We'd be happy to have it be a public visit or a private visit. We have offered to get together with critics behind closed doors. We've offered to get together with critics publicly if they would prefer that. We've offered critics a chance to come and address our students at Disputatio at New St. Andrews with no restrictions placed on what they would say. We've been very open-handed about this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what the strategy is on the other side has been to place us under an embargo. Don't talk about Moscow if you can help it at all. And if you talk about it, you should just refuse to engage, refuse to have any kind of back and forth. Mm-hmm. But we've sort of maintained an open door policy where our critics, we'd be willing to host our critics as they come out here.
Yeah. We actually have maybe not done that with critics as much as people that we know are on a different side of an issue here. But when they get here, they usually find that they like us a lot better than they did before they visited.
Yes,
because which
is one of the reasons why they're hesitant to do
it. That might be true. So how do you avoid, because as we've been through controversies together, I don't think of you as cynical or angry or frustrated when you're involved in these controversies. How do you avoid giving way to those things which that would have to be a temptation when you're getting hit by some of that anti-aircraft fire?
Yeah, some of this some of it's my dad's training and upbringing and family culture. Some of it I think has to be sort of a personality thing where things like that don't get to me quickly. And I would describe anger and frustration would not be a common temptation for me. And as far as the cynical side of it goes, I've tried to cultivate what I call a sunny cynicism.
A sunny cynicism.
Sunny.
It's like me being a pessimistic post-millennialist. Is that?
No, it's more like, I'll tell you a story. Here's an example of sunny cynicism. It involves one of my grandsons. When he was a little boy, he's now in college, but when he was a little boy, we had some guests over for Sabbath dinner, and I remember I was sitting across the living room, and Nate, his father, was standing by the fireplace, and we had company over that was sitting in the living room. And my grandson came running down the hall from the back of the house, and he ran up to his dad and threw his arms out and said, "I love Jesus." And Nate and I both at the same moment thought, I wonder what he did back there. and without speaking, Nate turned around and walked back to the back of the house to see, if the lamp was knocked over or something. And it turns out, happy ending. He really did love Jesus. He didn't do anything back there. But the impulse of saying, okay, what's going on here, and putting a possible construction on it is sort of I think a pastoral cynicism, not a personal cynicism.
Yeah.
So you're fully prepared. You're fully prepared to say, "Oh, this is great." You're also fully prepared to find out that the story you heard is not what actually happened.
Yeah.
And so I am cynical that way, but I'm not generally cynical when it comes to I'm going to have a negative take and I'm going to hold on to this negative take no matter what the evidence is.
Sure. Well, when you think about controversy, do you think that it being involved in controversy is a calling for some Christians in particular, or is it something that all Christians should be ready and trained in? Kind of, thinking about That Hideous Strength, and who is it, the Dimbles? They were kind of, behind the scenes and just going about their life, and they end up being so pedestrian that the critical things that they're doing, the other side, the bad guys, don't even pay attention to them. So is controversy something that everybody should be trained in, everybody should be ready for, or is it more of a special ops ranger kind of calling?
I would say I would lean in my answer towards it's a special gift and equipping thing, but it's something but it's a body life thing, which means that it entails the whole body. So let me explain what I mean. Paul says, "Is everybody a teacher?" A rhetorical question. The answer is no. Does everybody have the gift of tongues? Does everybody prophesy? No. So different parts of the body have different gifts. So the liver is not the eyeball, to use Paul's image. But the liver can't have complaints about the eyeball. If the liver is complaining about how much the eyeball sees, then there's a problem, right? So when let's say we're involved in hiring some to be on staff here at Christ Church, we don't run them through their paces to see, are you going to be a good controversialist?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that's not everybody's gift. That's not everybody's jam. But we do want to know whether or not you have any trouble with somebody else being a controversialist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're joining a church or coming on staff where some of us are involved in controversy, and some of us are engaged in polemical exchange. And we're not asking you to do that, but we're asking you if you're okay with other people doing that.
Sure. Well,
right?
For folks at classical Christian schools, what are some of the ways that in our schools we should be helping prepare young people for that ministry of being involved in controversies?
So there's two elements to this. One is the thing I mentioned before, where you're inculcating love for the lovely in the students,
mm-hmm.
where before you teach them how to defend things, you have to give them something that's worth defending.
Yep.
Okay. So just the content of a rigorous, full-orbed classical Christian education, there's a wealth of treasure there. And and I'm fond of saying in child rearing that the parents, your job is not to get kids to conform to the standard. And I would say the same thing about teachers in a classical Christian school. Your job is to get them to love the standard.
Yeah.
Not to conform to the standard, but to love the standard. Now, if they love the standard, they're going to have a predisposition to defend what they love. So what you need to do then is give them a sharp sword. You have to give them training in logic. It's grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric is going to equip them not only in what they love, but it's going to equip them in how to defend it. So if they've gone through a logic course, and they've gone through good, decent training in rhetoric, and they're looking at someone in the evening news saying something, talking, and let's say your junior high student casually mentions to mom the name of the fallacy that the president just delivered to us.
Yes.
That's the fallacy of thus and such. Well, if he can identify the fallacy sitting there on the couch in the living room, he can identify that same fallacy in a conversation.
Yeah.
Or identify the same fallacy when he's asking a question at a city council meeting, or when he's standing behind his father contending with their enemies in the city gates.
Mm-hmm.
He's trained. He sees what's actually going on. And if he's trained in rhetoric and stasis theory, he can identify correctly what's the point at issue.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not running around pulling leaves and twigs off the tree. You set the axe at the root of the tree. You can go for the one thing that will bring the whole tree down instead of chasing details.
Mm-hmm. That ministry of controversy has been one that, we see it in Scripture, in Christ's ministry. And then we see it all through church history of God taking some gifted people and putting them front and center to really have an impact more broadly. What are some of the best things that Christians could read or parents could read to just get a sense of how to encourage? So basically, what you just said was train them, then let them spar, give them some practice, and then let them loose when they're fully trained, and give them sharp tools to go out and fight. What are some of the ways that parents can, or some of the resources that parents can use to help get a heart and a mind for that kind of stuff?
Oh man. If you look at the grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, the three stages of the trivium,
mm-hmm.
At Logos School, our apologetics class is the senior year, and is part of that rhetoric stage. And one of the things you can do is assign students to bring in fallacies that they captured in the wild, letters to the editor or comments left on somebody's post. They bring them in and say, this is what I found out there in the world that is reasoning fallaciously this way. Another thing we've done at Logos is we've brought humanists, unbelieving speakers, in to address the apologetics class, and so that they are engaging with these ideas from people who really believe them, but in a controlled environment, and where they can get feedback, that sort of thing.
We do that here at Veritas too, and it was interesting to me that more classical schools don't do that, because they're going to be with those people in an uncontrolled environment right out of the box, when they graduate, or a few years later, at least, even if they go to a good college like New St. Andrews.
Yeah, it might be a few months, just 3 or 4 months, and they're talking to someone like this for real.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that kind of thing. Probably the best resource that I can think of when it comes to defending the faith and engaging winsomely would be C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
So I read a blurb once where someone said that Lewis made righteousness readable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read his popular apologetic works, primarily.
You mean like Mere Christianity and...
Mere Christianity, books like that. Mere Christianity, I would say Abolition of Man.
Yeah, yeah.
Also from the other side, Screwtape Letters, just basically popular apologetics. One of the things that Lewis does is he dissects arguments. He simply takes them apart, shows you how they work and how to answer them. Mm-hmm. And I would say that apart from the training I received in my family from sort of the dinner table debate, C.S. Lewis would rank up there with where I got all my basic training. Miracles, Mere Christianity, The Pilgrim's Regress, books like that.
Yeah, and having grown up in a Scots-Irish family like the Wilsons, that kind of, that does really, it trains you, and it makes you, like, when I was a little kid, the kids would leave the dinner table and the rest of the family would talk, and when you knew you were a grown-up when they let you stay around the table, and then you knew you were really a grown-up when you were able to get in there and mix it up with them. And that, I joke that sometimes in my family, conflict means love. If you
that's the love language.
If you love me enough, you'll fight with me. So, I think that's one of those things. Sometimes I'm in controversies, not of the scope that you're in, but I'm in them, and someone says, like, you don't seem to be flustered by this, and I'm like, oh, what? Like what? What are you talking about? Like this is like par for the course. This is the way things go. Well, Doug, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for talking with us about how we can help prepare young men and women to be ready if they're called to step in to these situations which are multiplying all over our society. This is a growth area. Yeah, that they would be ready and prepared and would bring glory to the name of Jesus, and have that opportunity to help our culture, help people in our culture take a second look at some of the presuppositions that they have, and to see Christ and his people differently. So, Doug, thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. And amen to all that.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to learn more about Veritas, visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.